Shabbat Shalom. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you and keep you. Ya'er Adonai panav alecha v'chunecha. May the Lord deal kindly with you and be gracious unto you. Yasa Adonai panav alecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May Adonai bestow his favor upon you, granting you peace. Undoubtedly, one of the oldest, most popular, and most powerful prayers in all of Judaism, the priestly benediction, is found in this week's Torah portion. We didn't quite read it this Shabbat, but had we continued reading a few more verses, we would have heard that God spoke to Moses, commanding Aaron to bless the people Israel with the eternal words, which we just read. It is these few lines of Torah that have been used for practically every occasion under heaven. From the Brit Milah to B'nai Mitzvah, from conversions to marriages, we hear these words spoken from parents over their children at Shabbat dinner tables, and we even find the priestly benediction adorning jewelry, which dates back to the year 600 in BCE. The words of the priestly benediction truly convey a deep sense of strength and seem to appear at the most opportune moments in our lives. As we heard Cantor Meisner beautifully sing the benediction yesterday morning in our Shavuot service, I became completely absorbed in this final benediction. May Adonai grant you peace. And speaking openly this week, the concept of peace has been a challenging one. We have seen a great deal of civil unrest in the United States in the wake of yet another innocent Black man who was murdered, this time by a white Minneapolis police officer. As George Floyd lay dying, the officer's knee pressed into his neck. Mr. Floyd gasped, "I can't breathe, please stop." These same exact words were spoken by Eric Garner when he was murdered. "I can't breathe." The list is growing at an alarming rate, and we must never become desensitized. We must commit every name to memory. Trayvon Martin, "I can't breathe." Michael Brown, "I can't breathe." Sandra Bland, "I can't breathe." Freddie Gray, "I can't breathe." Ahmaud Arbery, "I can't breathe." Alton Sterling, "I can't breathe." Breonna Taylor, "I cannot breathe." How much pain can we endure? We are not even halfway through the year of 2020, and it has already pushed us to our limits. As if an international pandemic was not enough, we are now faced with social uprisings in Minneapolis, Denver, New York, Chicago, Louisville, Dallas, Atlanta, and some 25 other major cities in North America. Perhaps you have seen the destruction. Police precincts are being burnt to the ground. Cars are being set ablaze and businesses looted. Many question the rationality of such actions. Many seem to be much more concerned with the destruction of property than the loss of life. In no way do I condone these violent measures in any form or fashion. But what exactly is the correct response to the murder of unarmed individuals in broad daylight? We know for certain that these violent activities do not erupt out of nowhere. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has said many times during his speeches about nonviolence, he says, these outbursts are and were rooted in despair. They are the actions of a deeply unheard people. But let us consider how hurt, how thrashing with pain does someone need to be to burn down their own city. I understand that not everyone will necessarily agree with me on this issue. And frankly, I was quite nervous to even touch the subject. However, I was reminded by the powerful words of Elie Wiesel, who wrote that we must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. And so we must speak out. This precise sentiment in the freedom of the pulpit is one of the pillars upon which the Holy Blossom community stands. Silence in the face of racism is a grave transgression. We must rise up with our voices and not our fists and not our torches. We must call out all acts of hatred, persecution, and prejudice. We must go one step further than is comfortable. As Angela Davis said, in a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist. We must become anti-racist. May we all seek to live out this truth. With his permission, I want to share with you the words of my friend and one of Holy Blossom's newest members, Zach Fleming. He said, "Being Jewish, I know a ton of people harbor anti-Semitic views. But on the outside, I am still white. My Judaism is not exposed, so to speak. I cannot comprehend what it must be like to fear for your life whenever you step out of your front door, to worry about your kids, your brothers, your sisters, your parents, that maybe they will be next. That some bigoted lady walking her dog might threaten to call the cops on you and tell them you threatened her life in order to get you shot. Or just going out for a jog down the road and getting lynched. We are hardly immune to this in Canada, though maybe not to the same degree that it is happening in the US, but let us not fall into the trap to say that it is not happening here. I could be wrong, and maybe it's always been this way, and we are just seeing it now because there are cameras everywhere. Well, continue using those cameras. Film everything and know your rights. This sickens me and breaks my heart. Something has got to give." The priestly benediction speaks of peace. And in the violent aftermath of these modern-day lynchings, we have heard protesters chanting, "No justice, no peace." It is my hope that the people who are most affected by fear and anger will be able to express their pain peacefully. I'd like to share 3 tangible ways of responding to this hatred and unrest, which were proposed by Jess Burke, the Associate Director of Campus Advocacy and Community Training at CEJA here in Toronto. First, she says, do not recirculate videos of police brutality. It is traumatizing. Stop sharing graphic videos of Black people being murdered. The people most affected by these tragedies have already shared this information, and we just need to listen and engage. Al Tatjana writes that if you just believe Black people, then we don't need to videotape us dying. It's becoming normalized to watch us be murdered on social media. That is disturbing. How much awareness does there need to be? It can't all be in the form of watching Black people actively die. We as a community can commit to stop watching and circulating these videos. We know that it is not helpful. Second, learn in public. Understand the causes and get educated. Strive to understand the relations of inequality and white supremacy. We cannot rely on Black scholars or friends to do the emotional labor and work for us. We must take an active and academic interest in these topics and share our findings with our networks as we expand our knowledge. This is challenging. This can be uncomfortable, and it is absolutely necessary in breaking down societal structures that work to separate us. And third, research advocacy organizations and agencies founded and led by Black Canadians. If you are in a position to do so, perhaps you might consider donating to these organizations. This is righteous tzedakah. This is effective And this is what is required on our pursuit of justice, empowering Black voices and listening to them. Anti-Black racism is fatal. We must not ignore something because it is uncomfortable. I have no idea if I'm doing everything right in my allyship, but I can tell you that I am trying. Commenting on his brother's recent murder, Philonise Floyd said, "I am never going to get my brother George back," as he wiped away his tears. I understand and I see why a lot of people are doing a lot of different things around the world. I don't want them to lash out like that, but I can't stop people right now because they have pain. They have the same pain that I feel. I want everything to be peaceful, but I can't make everybody peaceful. I just can't. Our tradition has taught us to be radical lovers of peace. And if we look back into the not so distant past, we will find that the Jewish people were at the forefront of those who answered the call of racial injustice in the American South. On March 7th, in 1965, civil rights leaders led 600 marchers towards Montgomery, Alabama, in pursuit of voting rights, but were stopped after just 6 blocks. The marchers were brutally attacked by police officers as they crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. Images of these attacks were televised across the country and the world, horrifying citizens and rousing support for voting rights throughout the United States. That day became known as Bloody Sunday, and in March of this year, we marked the 55th anniversary. And 2 weeks later, in 1965, on that same bridge, Martin Luther King Jr. and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel linked arms with a number of other notable civil rights leaders and completed that march. Heschel powerfully remarked, "To act in the spirit of religion is to unite what lies apart, to remember that humanity as a whole is God's beloved child. Racism is worse than idolatry. Few of us seem to realize how insidious, how radical, how universal and evil racism is. Few of us realize that racism is the greatest threat to humankind." Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel claims racism is worse than idolatry. It is the gravest threat to humankind. We learn from Parshat Naso that we as a priestly people have a mission to continue the work of our priestly forefather Aaron, who, according to the 15th century Rabbi Yitzhak Arama, had a skill for weaving together the threads of discord into a harmonious fabric. His tool was a silver thread. But why silver? Surely gold is more precious, and thus a more fitting thread to create our precious blessings of peace. Rabbi Norman Patz explains that silver was selected as Aaron's thread of peace because, unlike gold, silver needs polishing. It needs to be burnished. In other words, in order for peace to prevail, we cannot simply wait for God to grant it to us. V'yasem lecha shalom. Yes, the priestly benediction states that peace is granted, but we know that peace needs our attention. We must work at creating it. God does not provide peace. God simply provides the raw materials for us to create peace for ourselves. So whether it is the shalom that we wish to create and maintain in the world, or the shalom we wish to create and maintain in our own homes, we have to do something more productive with our hands than pointing fingers. We have to start using our hands to transform the raw materials alluded to in the words of the priestly benediction into something tangible, something useful, like a shining silver thread. For by this thread, we can weave the clamoring discord of this world into a harmonious fabric by which to blanket us all in peace. As the wise Hillel charged us so many centuries ago, let us be among the disciples of Aaron, loving peace and pursuing peace by loving people and bringing them closer together. I want to conclude with a prayer that was written by Rabbi Andrea Goldstein in St. Louis, Missouri, who was quite active in the aftermath of the shooting death of Michael Brown. Rabbi Goldstein writes, "Source of all being, creator of all life, may your goodness find its way into the hearts of all of your children. May those who wield power do so with the balance of wisdom, justice, and compassion. May those who feel powerless remember their intrinsic worth and also act with a balance of wisdom, integrity, and compassion. May we all feel called to action based on the injustices of racism and see ourselves not as enemies of one another, not in struggle with one another, but as human beings created in the image of God, connected to one another's well-being. May all of us come to acknowledge that the racism which is pervasive in our world. May we commit to sitting down with one another in honest dialogue, opening our hearts and compassion to one another, bearing witness to the pain and fear of one another, even if, and especially if, the other looks and seems so different from ourselves. May we commit to joining together in acts of justice that will bring about equality in education, economic opportunities, law enforcement, and judicial proceedings. May each of us come to understand that ultimately, my experience of freedom, justice, and peace is inextricably linked to the freedom, justice, and peace of every other person in our world. May we open our eyes to the invisible lines of connection that unite us, and with clarity of vision, continue to work for a world where every person's life is valued, cherished, and loved. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will.